In previous times, the officials of the Historical Society either had factories or shops, and they had to take their holidays in August. In the past, we've had problems with bad weather in January, and of course this year, because of global warming, it was perfect weather. We'll see what happens. Most of you must have heard, may I call you Avi, before, giving wonderful lectures on all aspects of Judaism. Avi, as you know, was born in Jerusalem. He went to the Hebrew University, where he got his first degree. Then he came to Cambridge, where he helped with the Arab languages. He's an expert on Semitic languages, helped with the Geniza. Then he came to Leeds, and he was in the Department of Semitic Languages. Yeah. We often hear pieces from the Koran, which is very confusing, that you must kill non-Muslims or you must be friendly with Muslims. But tonight, Avi will explain everything to us.
I'm not sure I'll explain everything, but I'll try. Thank you very much, Malcolm, for the introduction. One correction, I was born in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. What I want to say is that I gave you a talk about 6-7 years ago, maybe more, about the history of Islam. I sincerely hope that you forgot everything I said, because I have to repeat myself tonight several times when I discuss this topic of the Quran and the Bible, or the Bible and the Quran. In order to understand the similarities between the two, we have to go slightly back. I'm not going to lecture to you about the history of Islam, because it would need at least 5 weeks or 5 months. But I will give you just a little bit of information about Islam to set the scene before we reach the main subject. Now, we all know that Islam developed in Arabia. What happened before Islam? All this area was populated by many, many Arab tribes. The tribal system was very simple. There was a head, a sheikh. You are familiar with the word sheikh. He was the head of the tribe. There were many, many tribes. And what did they do for living? Fighting each other. All the time there were wars and wars and wars. And they going on in Arabia, which stopped to celebrate the holy months of the year. But outside these holy months of the year, they continue fighting most of the time. People who lived there were nomadic, which means they moved from one place to another. They hardly settled down. Only people of the cities, Mecca, Medina, and others. By the way, Medina was called Yathrib. The period was called Jahiliyyah, which simply means ignorance. So the Arabs, the Muslims, refer to Arabia before Islam as the period of ignorance. Now, they were scattered all over. There were people who lived in, of course, in the main cities, which I mentioned, Mecca and Yathrib. Yathrib was the name of Medina before he changed its name to Madinat Nabi or Al-Madina. What they did for living, apart from fighting, they used to have a business. People of Mecca in particular lived on the business. They used to send caravans with all the merchants and everything down south to the Yemen and up north to where today is Syria and Lebanon and Palestine. And those caravans who used to visit all these places to sell and to buy products and bring them back to Arabia and sell them down south, had to be protected by people who were paid to protect the caravans, because tribes used to attack caravans, rob them, kill the men in particular, take the women, and they simply destroyed almost the whole system of trade which was current in those days in Arabia. Now, you also needed very good, very skillful guides to take these caravans in different routes to avoid any attacks by other tribes. So the guides became experts over the years and used to take these caravans to all these areas as necessary. Now, for a caravan to leave Mecca, if you remember where Mecca was, and to go all the way up to the north, to Syria, it used to take about 9 months to arrive in the place, do the business for several months, and then buy and sell and take all the products back with them to Arabia, to Mecca and to Medina. Now, this, you can imagine, there was no communication at the time, there was no telephones, nothing at all, and this is how people survived over all these years, and mainly dealing with these businesses, but also dealt with other things. The interesting thing about the Mecca was that it also encouraged culture, and Mecca was the center not only for the religion, pre-Islamic religion, which was paganism. People were pagans before Islam appeared, and it was one of the major centers because the Kaaba, where the Muslims go on Hajj, existed at the time. The Arabs believed that this Kaaba was founded by Abraham, okay, and his son Ishmael, who founded the city of Mecca and brought here the Kaaba. And so they used to worship the Kaaba even before Islam. Now, I said it was a pagan society because they believed in various gods. They believed in different gods at the time, including 3 goddesses, Alat and others. And so they were worshipping them, and everybody could choose a god he wanted to worship, and worship him. There were very interesting customs at the time which were interesting for us. For example, people used to put stones at the entrance to the tents and touch the stone before they walked into the tent, and when they left the tent, they touched the stone to get a blessing from it. Does it remind you something? Precisely. And so this was the custom in pre-Islamic Arabia. When Islam started with the Prophet Muhammad, he abolished all this. He abolished all these customs and old customs, paganism, and brought the idea of believing in one God. But we'll come to it in a few seconds. Now, all this territory, the huge territory, in spite of the distances, we know that the Arabs who lived in Arabia managed to have good contacts, not only with their neighbors, but also with other countries, with India, for example, and what today is Iran, it was Persia at the time. And in spite of this living in some kind of seclusion, which means in Arabia, huge area, they managed to maintain such contacts with all these countries and learn a lot from them. This is the only way we can explain how come that the Arabic language in pre-Islamic Arabia acquired so many words and even customs and beliefs which were originated from India, originated from Iran or Persia and other countries. And they also gave a lot. The Arabs gave a lot of their experience to all these countries. So the idea that they were separated, secluded, it's not entirely true. It was a very vibrant society which came in contact with other societies, learned and taught, and they imparted in many customs which were current at the time. In Mecca, I mentioned that it was a very important cultural center at the time. Mainly poets developed in the area and used to write beautiful poetry in pre-Islamic Arabia, which was collected and called mu'allakat. Mu'allakat in Arabic means the hung one, something which is hung. And all the poems, the famous poems composed by different poets, used to be hung in Mecca at the entrance of the market. The market was called Ukaz, and they used to hang these poems all about when traders used to come to the place, they could read about it. They used to have festivals there and celebrations and all to do with the local culture, which was very, very interesting. Another question which is important is the position of men. As you can imagine, it was a very patriarchal society. Men were very important. They were the heroes, the fighters. They were the strong people. But at the same time, women had enjoyed quite a lot of freedom at the time. And it's very interesting from testimonies which we read by Arabs, Arab historians at the time. In pre-Islamic Arabia, women were much more liberated than we are in certain societies even today, which is very interesting. We know, for example, some interesting cases when women were controlled, had the say in the family. They even overruled sometimes what the men were deciding to do, and they carried a great power in them. We have interesting stories about women, for example, who were free, who could have boyfriends, lovers even at the time, and they felt much more free than they were later on. The position of girls, boys and girls. Boys, of course, had to continue with the tradition, the family tradition. They used to join the fathers, even in fighting, to learn how to do things as they were carried at the time. Girls, for example, had not a very good position there because there was a custom which later was forbidden by Islam. If a father could see that his wife gave birth to females, only females, he was allowed to bury their babies alive as soon as they were born. This was a famous custom in Arabia before Islam. It's called wa'd in Arabic, and it was a custom which allowed the family to control the number of females in the family. Of course, it created lots of social problems later on. Now, this custom, this brutal custom, was forbidden by the Prophet Muhammad himself, who said in the Koran, you must not bury the girls anymore. He himself had 4 daughters, so one can understand why he didn't feel comfortable to allow this barbaric custom to continue. We come to the Jews of Arabia. Nobody knows precisely when the Jews arrived for the first time in Arabia. There are 2 schools. One school says that it was after the first destruction of the temple, which it was around 586 BCE. And some people say, no, it was after the destruction of the second temple, which was 70 AD or BE. Now, there are 2, we don't know for sure, but they're all traditions. For example, the Yemenite Jews, until today, strongly believe that their ancestors arrived in Arabia and to the Yemen after the destruction of the first temple. But these are all traditions. We don't have any evidence about it. There are some references to the existence of Jewish settlements in Arabia, but we don't have much information about those. What we do know is that in Medina, rather than Mecca, in Medina, there were 3 tribes, Jewish tribes, who lived there. They were very, very wealthy tribes, united, strongly united, and most of them were either worked as goldsmiths or they were working also at developing the arm industry. So they were known to be good producers of swords and other weapons at the time. People were struggling to get a Jewish-made sword or spear or whatever because they were known for their quality. And also there were agricultures. Some of these tribes, as I said, there were 3 tribes living in Medina, Banu Kainuka, Banu Nadir, and Banu Quraiza, and they were settled there, and they had their own synagogues, had their own schools, and the education system, from what we can conclude from different sources, were quite strong and developed better than the local Arabs who did not develop education system as we understand the concept today. Now, they were living there peacefully, and there was no problems recorded between the Jews and the Muslims, the Arabs, before Islam arrived. Now, into this world, and I have to rush a little bit, Islam came. Islam is associated, as we all know, with one personality, is the Prophet Muhammad. He was working first as a guide of caravans, became very, very known for his skills to be a good guide who managed to avoid all the robbers who used to attack caravans. And then after a while he started to work for a lady by the name of Khadija, who was a widow, a very successful businesswoman, and he used to guide her caravans from Mecca all the way up to the north through Palestine and Syria and other territories of the time. And he worked for her for some years, and then they fell in love and he got married to her. He was 25 years old when he married her, and she was 40. And since they got married, he less and less went with the caravans and stayed in Mecca. He didn't have to work hard at the time. She was very wealthy enough. So it was a good arrangement. And then when he was in Mecca, he started to go out, reach the mountains surrounding Mecca, and sitting there and enjoying, quiet life. And then used to come back home. And one of the occasions, he had a revelation. Angel Gabriel appeared, and they told him to read what he is about to give him to read. And this is the history of the Koran, how the Koran started. According to the Muslim tradition, the Koran came down verse by verse from heaven via the services of Gabriel, who taught Muhammad all these lines or these verses, and then Muhammad returned home and started to tell his family first and then his close friends about the mission, which means that he felt that God contacted him and told him that he has to bring new religion to the world. And he emphasized this point time and again, that this was the final religion, the most important religion given to human beings, and this abolishes all the other religions, namely Judaism and Christianity. So he was the messenger of God. He never said he was the prophet. He never claimed that he had supernatural powers, but he said, my job is I was appointed by God to lead the people into a new area. At first, he met with a strong opposition. The opposition came from his neighbors, and of course the people of Mecca gradually regarded his mission as very dangerous, because they were afraid that if people follow him, he may transfer the center of worship from Mecca to other places, especially that he used to come back and tell about his visits to Jerusalem, to other centers of the world. This would have hit their business, the trade, very hard had he changed the location from Mecca. So there was clear misunderstanding here, the fear of the Meccan wealthy people, businessmen, who owed him and made his life very, very miserable, to the effect that after a while he was forced to leave Mecca and to escape from Mecca to Medina. So he left Mecca and for Medina in the year 622, which is the year of the Hijra. Hijra in Arabic means immigration, moving from one place to another. So this is the Hijra, and from that date, the Muslims start their calendar. You know that there is a Muslim calendar as opposed to other calendars that we have. Now, Muhammad stayed in Mecca. He met many Jews on his excursions to the north, and he met many Christians and learned from them about their religions. So he absorbed a huge amount of knowledge about the other religions, which played a significant role in his mission, because his mission echoes many times the Judaism and Christianity, and more Judaism than Christianity. So he was, during his travels to all these places, he learned so much about the Jewish Bible and the New Testament, the Old Testament, the New Testament. He learned about other religions also, but mainly about Judaism, because he was also in contact with the Jewish tribes in Medina, and he was very impressed with the Jews at large, and he befriended them. He approached them, and there were many good contacts between him and the Jews, mainly of Medina. Now, he called on all religions to accept him, and the Jews could not accept him. At the beginning, the Jews thought that he was trying to convince people to convert to Judaism, because he forbade on his people eating pork. He forbade on people to drink wine, although Jews did drink wine, of course, but he forbade gambling, he forbade usury, he forbade lots of things which he learned from the other communities. And he said that this was a message from God to reinforce what he heard from the other faith he came in contact with. So he was following many rules. For example, at the beginning, he said that there was no question of fasting in Ramadan. There was one day to have to fast, Yom Kippur. He made the Muslims fast on Yom Kippur, which is called Ashura, the 10th, Eser in Hebrew, the 10th day of the month. So people followed lots of things which were in existence already and practicing by the Jews. And therefore, the Jews at the beginning thought that he was converting his own people into Judaism. But this was a big misunderstanding when for example, when he allowed people to continue to eat the flesh of camels, for example, camel meat, the Jews said, no, we can't accept it. We can't eat it. It's not kosher. Okay? But he said to the Jews, I can't forbid my people from eating it. This is the main source of protein, if you like, for us in the desert. So we couldn't do that. And gradually there were some, I can't say not at that stage, clashes, but there were some misunderstandings. The moment he moved to Medina, he was actually invited by the Median Arabs to come to Medina, to go over to Medina. It suited him very well because he couldn't stay on in Mecca because of the opposition he met by the Meccan. So he moved to Medina. At the same time, the Medians, who were clashing all the time, there were two Arab tribes there, Aus and Khazraj, and they were fighting each other. So they needed somebody who will act as a go-between, as a mediator between them, and they invited him to come over. So he left Mecca, and with some of his supporters and fans, they moved to Medina. And in Medina, he became much closer to the Jewish community there. And at that time, he started to explaining to the Jews that he needed their support and he needed them to convert to Islam. And the Jews, of course, rejected it, and here the troubles started. There was a complete misunderstanding, which the Jews opposed him, and when he put some more pressure on the Jews to convert, or at least to accept him as a messenger of God, the Muslims rejected the idea. There's no messengers, there are no prophets anymore. After the prophets Malachi and other prophets which are mentioned in the Bible, we cannot accept any other prophets. So there's no prophethood anymore. And of course, he needed the support of the Jews, because the Jews played, as I explained, a very important role in the daily life in Medina. But he couldn't get it, and therefore some troubles began. The Jews who lived in Medina had to oppose him openly. And of course, it wasn't a good idea, because Muhammad only started his preaching and heralding Islam in Medina. Without Medina, he would not be able to survive in Mecca, because, as I explained before, the Meccan people were completely against him. So Muhammad had some fighting with the Meccan people, who thought that they have to put an end to this movement, new movement, right from the beginning. There were 3 famous battles in which the Muslim community had to confront the Meccan people. There were 3 famous battles, one in Uhud, and another one in the Khandak. I don't want to give you all this information because I'm trying to reach the main subject. But anyway, to try to cut it short, he won the first battle against the Meccan, he lost the second one, and he won the third one, the last one, and then he returned to Mecca as a triumphant, as a big hero there, and more people from Mecca, and as a matter of fact, all Arabia accepted him and adopted Islam. This was the greatest success at the time. Unfortunately, 10 years later, after moving to Medina, he died at the age of 62, and it caused a great havoc in Islam, because nobody expected for him to die. He was the messenger of God, and then suddenly he dies like anybody else. Now, he never said that he was immortal. He never claimed that he was going to live forever. But it was rather a shock for the Muslim community, to the effect that some of his supporters abandoned Islam. And they said, well, if the Prophet is dead, there's no Islam anymore. Now, it was left for his successors, Abu Bakr and Omar and Uthman and Ali, who were the first caliphs after Muhammad, especially the first one, Abu Bakr, who came out with a big statement saying, whoever worshipped God, God is alive. Whoever worshipped Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. So Muhammad is immortal. He is not, nobody could have expected from him. He was a messenger of God, he was the prophet of God, but he is like any other human being. Whereas God is alive, is living forever. So it did help for some people to come back to Islam, but Islam now, the leaders who succeeded Muhammad had to take a very firm decision about fighting those who left, Ridda. They're called those in Arabic, the people of Ridda, which means the return to the old system. So they had to fight them in order to establish Islam, which was, as we see ourselves, it was only a new entity which should have been protected. They did a very good job. Abu Bakr didn't survive long. He was assassinated after 3 years. And then came Omar ibn Khattab, who was a very important leader and a great military person. He was the one who conquered all Palestine and all the territories of Jordan and others, including the city of Jerusalem. Now, the city of Jerusalem was very, very important in Islam from the time of Muhammad, although the name Jerusalem does not appear in the Quran at all, which is very interesting. What we have in the Quran, one reference to the house of the holy place, or the holy house, which is Beit al-Maqdis, as they call it in Arabic, but it's not, the name Jerusalem is not in the Quran. There's also a long tradition in Quran, in Islam, that Muhammad visited heaven to give him more sort of authority. He was one of those who were befriending God, and therefore he got an invitation to go up to heaven. And how did he manage to get there? Overnight, he flew over his horse. He was riding his horse from Mecca to Jerusalem. He tied the horse to where today is the Wailing Wall, and from there he ascended to heaven. In heaven he met of course, Moses, and he met God. He saw God. He met Moses, and he met Christ, and he spoke to them. And the discussion was about the most important religion in the world. And of course, he got a agreement, a consent of all of them that Islam was the most important one. He returned from heaven to Jerusalem, and from there he rode his horse back to Mecca. All this happened in over one night, and it's well known. This night is well known in Islam. Many the Muslims worship this night. They call it Mi'raj, which means the night when Muhammad ascended heaven. It's a very important one. There's another interesting episode which is accounted by the Muslim traditionalists, who said that when Muhammad reached heaven, he met Moses, and Moses asked him, how many prayers a day you are supposed to pray? And Muhammad said to him, about 1,000. So 1,000 prayers a day. Said Moses, no, it's too much. You won't be able to do anything else. You have to ask the boss for a reduction. So he spoke to he said to God that it was too much, 1,000. So God agreed on 500. Again, he went to Moses and told him about it. And Moses said, it's too much. You can't pray 500 times a day. It's impossible. So they went down, down, down until they stood on 5. Then he went back to Moses and he said to him, we only are supposed now to pray 5 times a day. So Moses said, well, we are supposed 3 times. 5 is not too bad. Accept it. The idea is very, very interesting. It is, you find it in all the books of history by Muslim historians from the 8th, 9th, and 10th century who recall this story about it. But the interesting thing about it is that it teaches you, if you think about it, that he learned bargaining from a Jew. The Jew taught him how to bargain. And so he managed to reduce it to 5 prayers a day, and ever since Muslims pray 5 times a day. Quran. The Quran, as I said, came down verse by verse. Okay? So later on it was accumulated, the verses were accumulated into chapters. A chapter in the Quran is called surah. Surah is a chapter in the Quran. There are 114 surahs in the Quran, arranged in a very interesting way, from the longest one, more or less, to the short, 1 verse or 2 verses. So it goes by length. Some of the surahs came down, or the verses, which are called ayah. Ayah is a verse, and surah is a chapter. So all these verses came down one by one, okay? Some of them in Mecca, when Muhammad was still in Mecca, and some in Medina. And you see that those in Mecca contain lots of interesting stories, and to attract more people, more believers to join Islam. The Medinan one are more firm, talking about the law, Islamic law, the Sharia. It says you have to do this, you mustn't do this, and so and so. This is roughly. You can't say exactly that this division is so accurate. But mainly, you find all the interesting stuff, the stories, etc., in the surahs which came while Muhammad was in Mecca. What do we find in the Quran, in these surahs? We find stories, mainly stories which are also appearing in some other books, other traditions, mainly from Judaism, which means that in certain cases the Quran is echoing the Bible and even the Midrash, the Jewish Midrash, and there are lots of similarities between them. I just wanted to illustrate some of those. So, according to Islam, announces or heralds the appearance of Muhammad. In the same way that the Christians believe that the announcement about Christ appears in the book of Isaiah, chapter 5, where it says, and so on and so forth, where it refers, according to Christian belief, to the appearance of Christ. So the Muslims quoted this verse, and the Muslim theologians are familiar with what it says in the Bible, and they refer to the appearance of Muhammad and his mission. You see, a late Midrash claims that Muhammad was sent to save the Jews from the hands of the Christians. It's very interesting that Muslims, historians in the 9th and 10th century and later on, were aware of the clashes of what we call today anti-Semitism, okay? The clashes between Jews and the Christians, and they said that Muhammad was sent to save the Jews from the hands of the Christians. Now, I want to see here, where are the, oh yes, the comparison here. Right. Now, in explaining the Quran, Muhammad said that there is one book in heaven, we call it Kitab al-Mahfuz, which means the protected or the book which is up in heaven. And from there, all religions got their copies. So the Bible is in heaven, the Quran is in heaven, the New Testament is in heaven, but each leader, or each, if you like, a person who was sent, brought this copy, received this copy from God, and he brought it to mankind. Okay? So this is the Kitab Mahfuz. And here we go. Sorry. I have to do all the jobs. Yeah. Okay, this is Kitab al-Mahfuz. Now, we start with Bible and Quran. What we see here, I wish I could move this elsewhere, but I'm afraid to touch it, otherwise something will happen. So, the story of Adam, Eve, in the Bible, we know about Adam, Chava, Adam, Eve, and the snake. You remember the story about the snake. In the Quran is Adam, his wife, her name is not mentioned there, and the devil. The devil plays a very important role in Islam because the devil is the anti-verse of God. And although God is the creator and everything, but the devil is playing an important role, a negative role, in Islam. So the story about Adam and Eve, we talk about the snake. The Qurans talk about the devil who was whispering. He made Hava eat the fruit, the forbidden fruit, and the whole story is recorded in the Quran. The difference is that in the Bible there are two trees, Etz Hadat and Etz HaChaim, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. In the Quran is only one tree. Okay? The same story. The snake beguiled Eve, and the snake beguiled both. So, and devil also. The devil looked like a snake. According to some verse in the Quran said that the devil was like a snake. So the idea of snake is echoed even in the Quran. According to Midrash, is one of the Midrashim, it was a camel, not a snake, but a camel that pushed Chava to eat the forbidden fruit. Cain and Hevel, or Cain and Hevel. In the Quran, they are not mentioned by name. They are mentioned as two brothers. Okay? Cain killed Hevel, and as God rejected his, there's a midrash, and also in the Torah, it says that God didn't accept Cain's sacrifice or gift, and the Quran says that the fight was over two women. What happened there? The two brothers were married, not Cain and Hevel according to Judaism, but according to the Quran, it was two brothers who had married twin sisters. The Quran doesn't tell us the full story, but it refers to this episode. The Hadith, which was a collection of all the traditions collected later after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, is telling us that Cain, who married the ugly sister of the two, was so upset and so jealous that he killed Abel because Abel married the beautiful one. So there's the story of the hadith is provided additional information because the Quran is not telling us enough about the clash between the two brothers. Yeah, Abraham was Hanif. Hanif in Arabic, it says in Arabic, Hanif is somebody who believed in one God even before Islam. And Abraham was one of those who believed in monotheism. There were several people like this, and according to Muslim tradition, Muhammad himself was a Hanif, which means he believed in God. You have to account to it, because otherwise the conclusion would be that Muhammad was a pagan. And Islam cannot accept the fact that Muhammad was a pagan. So they said he belonged to this small group of people who accepted God as one God, and there were not many of them. Those who are mentioned a great deal in Muslim sources about the Hanif. Now, we are coming to the most important story according to the Quran, and this is the story about Joseph and by the way, Quran refers to all these famous personalities who appear in the Bible as prophets. So Abraham was a prophet, and Isaac was a prophet, and Jacob was a prophet, and Joseph was a prophet. All those, Moses was a prophet, of course. Christ was a prophet, according to Islam. So all these famous personalities were, according to Islam, prophets at the time. And Muhammad was the last prophet. After Muhammad, there was no prophecy anymore. The story of Joseph who was a prophet, as you remember from Genesis, the book of Genesis, the story about Joseph and his brothers who abandoned him and they wanted to kill him, and they pushed him into a boat, and then the caravan of Ishmaelites found him and brought him to Egypt, and then he was working for Potiphar. Potiphar was one of the important ministers of Pharaoh. So according to the Bible, Joseph was a slave who was bought by Potiphar, and he was working there in his house. And since Joseph was a very handsome boy, the wife of Potiphar wanted to make love to him. And so when she approached him and asked him to make love to her, he refused and ran away. And at that moment, the husband came home, and the wife complained to the husband that this slave tried to rape her, and so the husband was very upset about it, and he sent Joseph to jail, to prison. He was in prison, and you know the story in the Torah. The story is echoed in the Quran. I can't say verbatim, but large portions of it are exactly a combination of stories from the Torah and from the Midrash, the Jewish Midrash. For example, here you see that the comparison is that in a dream he saw the grain sheaves and the sun and moon. There are two dreams. In the Quran, only one dream, and talking about sun, moon, and 11 stars. He told his brother, Jacob warned him not to do it according to Quran, but he did say to his brother to annoy them, and this the story goes on and tells about it. The interesting bit about the story was in the Quran is when the Quran describes for us the episode with Mrs. Potiphar. Okay? And according to the Torah, as I've just mentioned, she wanted him to make love to her, and he escaped. According to the Quran, there's a very interesting case there, which says that he escaped at the door, but she pulled his garment, okay, to force him to come back. And the garment was torn, and he managed to escape, and she was left with a piece of the garment in it. And when she was confronted by her husband, so one of the advisors of her husband, according to the Quran, said, well, we have to decide who is lying to us and who is telling the truth. Because Joseph said, I didn't try anything. She tried. And she said, no, he tried to rape me. So the advisor of Potiphar said to him, let's see. If his garment is torn in the front, it means that he prepared himself to rape her. But if it is torn at the back, it means that she tried to pull it. And Potiphar admired this great wisdom, and they looked at it, examined, and it was torn from the back of his garment. So the Potiphar said to his wife, you are lying, you are unfaithful, and he preaches to her according to the story of the Koran. We don't have this story, the full story in the Bible about where it was torn from. But the interesting thing that happened later on, and this comes in this case, we refer to the Midrash. When the story came out, probably the people read the Psalm at the time. So the women of Egypt, especially the wealthy ladies there, were mocking Mrs. Potiphar for trying to make love to a slave. A person in her position couldn't use a slave to make love to her, you see. So they were mocking her. And according to the Midrash, she invited them to a party. And when the women, those who were gossiping about her, came to the party at Mrs. Potiphar's house, she gave them knives and apples and told them to peel the apples and to eat them. And at that moment, when all these women were sitting there with knives in their hands, she said to Joseph, come out, I want you to show yourself to them. And he was so handsome that the women, instead of peeling the apple, were peeling their hands, their skins, until they were bleeding. And Mrs. Potiphar said to them, you see how I fell for him? You have the same thing happened to you. You would be interested in him like this. This story is echoed in the Quran, exactly which was the story which appears in the Midrash. So, at that moment, she saved her honor, according to both sources, by proving to them that Moses was so attractive that they could, lose their senses to see him. Yeah, there's another thing which is in the Midrash. Another Midrash is telling us that Potiphar's wife asked the women to tell their husbands that Joseph seduced them, and the husband demanded his execution. But Potiphar's daughter saved him, because she also fell in love with him. I think he was a character, wasn't he? Now, I'm skipping because I look at the time, but we have in the Quran the same stories about the golden calf, if you remember it. The Quran mentions David and Goliath and the fight. The story of the poor man's lamb, you remember this from the book of Samuel, when David saw this Bathsheba bathing on the roof, and he fell in love with her, brought her, although she was married to Uriah, who was his first general, and he sent Uriah to the front in order to be killed so that he could take his wife. It's a terrible story. And then God sent the prophet, one of the prophets, to draw the attention of David to his appalling behavior. So the story he told was about a poor man who had one lamb and a rich man who had many cattle and flocks of sheep and all those things. And when the rich man was celebrating an occasion at home, he sent, according to the Torah or the Bible, he sent somebody to take the one lamb from the hands of this poor man, sacrifice it so that his guests can enjoy it. So he didn't use one of his own sheep, but he used the only sheep, the one sheep. This was a sort of a metaphor to indicate to David about his bad decision by sending Uriah, sacrificing him in order to enjoy his wife. You see, David married her later, but it's a different story. But anyway, the Quran doesn't mention the whole story, but it does recall the story of the poor man and his one lamb, which was sacrificed. We don't know from the Quran the background, as I've just said, but we know that there is reference to that. The Quran also mentions the visit of the visit of Queen of Sheba to Jerusalem. Her name in Islam is Belkis, the Queen of Sheba, who arrived to visit King Solomon, and she tried Solomon, according to the Bible, she tried Solomon, she found out he was a very clever, very wise person, and according to the tradition of the Ethiopians, they originated from the affair between King Solomon and Queen of Sheba, who returned home to today's Ethiopia. At the time was Habash, and she became pregnant and gave birth to the whole dynasty of the rulers of Ethiopia at the time. So there was an affair between Queen of Sheba. The Midrash is telling us a different story, which is not in the Quran, how King Solomon managed to make love to a Queen of Sheba. She refused him. He tried several times, and he was well known. He had 1,000 wives. Yes, but his punishment, he had 1,000 also mother-in-laws. But anyway, he was. So he tried to persuade her to make love to her. She refused, and therefore he tried to trick her. And what he did, he said to her, "Anything you request for me, then and I have to fulfill your request, we shall make love." And she said she agreed to this. But then she was very careful not to ask for anything. However, Solomon instructed the cook to bake a cake in which instead of putting sugar, she put a lot of salt. And Queen of Sheba ate it, and she was very thirsty. So in the middle of the night, she couldn't sleep, and she begged the king to give her a glass of water. And this is it. You believe in it? Yes, okay. Anyway, so another interesting point which we find here is the Quran is confirming that the Jewish people are the chosen people. And it says in the Quran in about 6 places. I chose one which says here, okay, the Israelis or Israelites are the chosen people. It says in the Quran, I preferred you because I have bestowed upon you my great gift. So remember that the children of Israel are the chosen from all other nations. This is the Quran. And another place here, it says there, everybody must know that we, God says, chose the people, the people of Israel as favorable over all other nations. That's very interesting that we have got this confirmed in the Quran. So the Quran accepts the fact that the Israelites or the children of Israel are the chosen people. Probably Muhammad heard it from the Jews, okay? And who said it repeatedly, that they were the chosen people. And we have even some stories which we don't know, but by Muslim historians, after, of course, Muhammad, that Muhammad used to visit sometimes synagogues and churches, but synagogues from which he learned from the Jews because about their traditions. Now, he didn't speak Hebrew as far as we know. In any case, Muhammad, according to the Quran, was illiterate. He couldn't write or read. But this is absolutely added to his greatness that a person who can't read or write could herald such a new faith into the world. There's a covenant, there's another place in the Quran it says that there is a covenant between God and the Israelites. And also, the interesting thing is about 4 places in the Quran it says that the land of Israel was promised by God to the Jews. So the Quran confirms it. I don't know why Israeli propaganda doesn't use it all the time, you see. But it is, say here, here it's, we gave this nation, we gave them, like in a bequeathed upon the Israelis, this land of Israel. The Ard means land, so he confirms, and there are three other places in the Quran which confirm that the land of Israel was given to the Israelites to live there. But it was very easy for Muhammad and his successors to explain the hatred and against the Jews, because the Quran repeats time and again the fact that the Jews abandoned and betrayed God. And therefore, God punished them and expelled them, dispersed them all around the world. The Quran mentions it several times, the Hadith mentions it several times. So, if we have anything negative between us and the Jews, the present Jews are not the real Jews, because the real Jews betrayed God. And therefore, the Israelis today, this the propaganda suggests that the Israelis today do not really represent the ancient Israelites, because the Israelites were chosen by God, were promised the land of Israel, but they betrayed God. Where did Muhammad got the idea? From the Jews themselves. What do we say in the tefillah, in the prayer? Because of our sins, we were expelled from our land. So he heard it, people reciting it, and therefore it was easy for him to take this idea, to bring it to the attention of his people, to account for the tension between Jews and Arabs. Just as a last sentence, this tension between Jews and Arabs, although it started at the times of Muhammad, we have many, many examples in history that there was no tension, both parties lived together peacefully, cooperated, and according to the documents we found in the Geniza, there were even partnerships between Jewish businessmen and Muslim businessmen who shared the same business. The only difference was that the Jew went to shul and the Muslim went to the mosque. But otherwise, the collaboration was incredible. I hope that the present communities will learn from the past. Thank you very much.
The next meeting is September the 2nd, when Professor Tom Lawson of the University of Northumbria will be talking about the Church of England's attitude to the Holocaust. That's a month today. Thank you very much. Join. Radio Jake.